Hello, welcome to Songs of Praise. The post-Christmas January blues may be behind us, but for many who suffer with depression or mental illness, this remains a difficult time.
I hear the story of one man deeply affected when the London 7/7 bombings happened on his doorstep.
It was very, very scary. I really thought I was really losing my mind.
We hear about the Interfaith Buddy Scheme and meet the Methodist minister and rabbi in training who've become good friends. And Connie will be delving into the history of British black gospel music.
Later, I'll have news of the Gospel Choir of the Year competition, and of course we've got inspiring hymns. Speaking of which, let's start with a traditional favourite.
One in 4 people will suffer a mental health problem. That means in the average family, someone will need help. I've come to Bethlehem Royal Hospital, thought to be the oldest psychiatric hospital in the world. If you go back a few hundred years, churches provided mental health services, and this hospital was founded in 1247 as the Priory of St. Mary of Bethlehem. By the 17th century, the name had been shortened to Bethlehem, or Bedlam.
Then, the hospital was a popular tourist attraction, with visitors paying to stare at the mentally ill patients. Ever since, the word Bedlam has been synonymous with madness.
Today, the hospital is about to open its doors to the public once more, with its new Museum of the Mind.
Victoria.
Hi.
Who are these gentlemen?
This is Melancholy Madness, and this is his friend Raving Madness. At the time these two statues were carved, which was the 1670s, these were really the only two diagnoses, if you like, that we had for mental health.
Raving is chained.
Yeah.
Why the chains?
At this point, there were no effective treatments, so restraints of various kinds were used to stop people harming themselves, but also to stop them from harming people around them.
We may have come a long way in medical advances, but there's still stigma attached to mental illness, something that the church is still grappling with. Here in the hospital chapel, I've come to meet 2 people who are sharing their experiences.
Like Will, I've been in church for, well, I've got a clergyman as a father. So,
Catherine Welby-Roberts is the daughter of the Archbishop of Canterbury. She and the Reverend Will Vanderhart have put together a mental health action pack to help churches understand the issues surrounding mental illness.
I mean, I've had mental health problems diagnosed for 10 years now. I'd say they started earlier than that. And church has often been a really challenging place. The majority of churches where I've had a negative experience would be mortified to know that things that they've said or the way that they've responded to me have caused me so much pain. You wouldn't say to someone who's got asthma, what do you have to be asthmatic about? You would say to somebody, what do you have to be depressed about? Because there's just a lack of understanding of what actually does it mean to have depression. Is it just simply that you're not really pulling your socks up and getting on with life? Or is there something more to it?
Well, as a church leader, I recognised there was a need. There are people in the church, and it was my experience, people shy away from antidepressant medication, saying that that's a kind of faithless option, and actually you need to pray and not take medication, or that therapy or any sort of talk therapy is slightly weird and potentially dangerous for you as a Christian, none of which transpired to be true at all. So the key thing was getting good advice, integrated advice, and that's why we've done the work that we've done.
Later in the programme, Will talks more about his personal struggle with mental illness. But for now, a beautiful hymn of hope.
Now, in some of Britain's fastest growing churches, the music you're most likely to hear is gospel. But did you know the music's been around in Britain for well over 100 years? Over the next 3 weeks, Connie is out to discover the story of British black gospel.
Croydon Seventh-day Adventist is a typical example of London's more traditional gospel churches. It's the home church of Ken Burton, who teaches gospel music to choirs all over the world.
The word gospel comes from the Old English God spell, which means a good message. And that's a direct translation of the Greek word evangelion, from which we get the word evangelical, and it's also connected to our word angel.
Can you give me an example of how you put gospel into a song?
Sure, let me gospelize the national anthem. Pentecostal church, they say the Queen's been saved.
The Queen has been saved. So how did it arrive in the UK?
Over 100 years ago, a group called the Fisk Jubilee Singers from Fisk University, Tennessee, came across and brought the slave songs, the spirituals, to the UK, and they also performed for Queen Victoria.
I got got a crown, you got a crown, all of God, you got a crown.
That spurred a whole new genre of music called the concertized spiritual.
The big turning point came with the first wave of Caribbean immigration in the late 1940s. Families began to settle in the UK, bringing the gospel music they'd grown up with.
Caribbean churches actually began in private homes. That moved on to church halls. From church halls, the more enterprising amongst these Pentecostal denominations pooled resources that led to the purchase of establishments like this.
The congregation of Lean New Testament Church of God bought this South London building in the 70s, but even then, many were still keeping gospel music inside the church.
In a lot of these churches in those times, you have to remember, the churches were a safe haven. Not that they purposely wanted to keep away from the outside, but inside these organizations, they could be themselves.
So when did things start to change?
Gospel music started to become more recognizable in the 80s. That was the era that gospel music went to a completely different level.
Watch next week as I find out what happened.
All of a sudden, gospel music was on TV, it was on the radio, and that was quite huge.